My name's Ken Davis, I'm Director of Both Smart Architects. I'm presenting LIV Munro, which is the two cylindrical towers you can see in the picture, and it's got a reasonably complicated, complex site condition, which I'll sort of take you through. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country which we're on today, and also which the project is on. And really, what's interesting about this, to some extent, is that the project we've submitted for consideration is the build-to-rent, called LIV Munro. It's actually owned by Mirvac. It's their first build-to-rent or institutional rental typology in Melbourne. But the project effectively spans the entirety of the Queen Vic market. So it originated when the council bought, I'll come on point, the council actually bought the Munro site back in, I think, 2014. They bought it really at the height of what you call the kind of tall tower residential boom happening in the city with the particular planning minister, and they bought it so they could control the interface between the city and the market. And what that meant was that they entered into an RFP process to find a development partner. We were successful in that, along with Mick from 6 Degrees, for PDG. And the project went on a pretty long journey over the time until Mirvac ended up buying into it, and we converted it from a typical residential development to build-to-rent in 2018. And it actually comprises effectively of 3 buildings. We're submitting the residential component, which is to the east, which is this component. 6 Degrees have delivered a building which includes affordable housing, a soon-to-be completed city library, effectively, and there's a little heritage building at the back as well. But we actually had to plan a development plan for the entirety of the market, including really key that the site actually had to accommodate 500 cars from the above ground car park to enable that to become a future park. So there's a complex history to the way the site has been broken up, and it sits at a really important juncture. Effectively, it's the interface between a forever to be low rise, public asset, effectively a public use zone, and what was becoming an incredibly dense part of the city. So hugely interested, a huge interest from both the council as a landowner, but also from the state as to the interfaces with the rest of the city. What was an appropriate scale? What was an appropriate massing approach? An architectural approach. So just to look at the basic principles of the site. So we have a public car park, 500 cars. The blue area is the 6 Degrees hub building, which has been delivered, and I think the city library is still fit out. And what we have then is a mixed-use tower. So we have a hotel on the podium, which the interiors are not by Both Smart, so it's not part of the consideration, but obviously the architectural expression of the building coming to ground is. And then you have effectively a 39-storey residential tower sitting on top of that, which comprises 490 apartments, 2 levels of amenity, including the rooftop as well, so top, podium and roof. Interestingly, because the council are the landowner the entire way through, they set a reasonably high standard of sustainability on the project. We had to achieve 8 stars average, 7-star minimum. What we managed to do, I think, and I'll get to the shaping of the tower, but the curve form's actually really quite important. They also had set a seating criteria across the whole market from a wind perspective. So much more onerous than the rest of the capital city, meaning that we effectively were in a position, because there's nothing to the north of us, where protecting the market was a key driver of the form of the building, also the development of the kind of streetscape. But really importantly, we were in a position where we had to discuss, and I guess particularly with the council, so Rob Adams was effectively our landowner and working with 6 Degrees, we, I guess, came to a position that there was an important idea about that there should be an edge to the market. We shouldn't be creating more public space necessarily in terms of large open spaces, but permeability was fundamental. So we developed a streetscape narrative, I guess you'd say, in conjunction or master planning with 6 Degrees, which talked to the permeability of the overall site. So which meant the establishment of a series of laneways, and this sort of defines the architecture to some extent, and an arcade that runs between the building. We obviously also then had an envelope that was quite wide, with a great deal of south-facing units. So the soft form came about really as a result of wind, but also it actually exposed more of our apartments to the sun, and allowed us to perform an action which was to break the tower into 2 vertical forms as opposed to the quite wide format that the planning environment drove through the process. And so to the actual ground plane, so the red dotted outline is what we're talking about, but it was actually conceived really as one entire continuous project. It was submitted as one DA, effectively, along with 6 Degrees, all feeding into one set of drawings. You can kind of see the laneway network that runs through, which are open to the air, with an arcade that runs through. The hotel, lobby, restaurant, core and retail sits on this side. the build-to-rent lobby and some retail elements and loading dock and car park exit sits on that side. And the public cars will come down into Queen Street, into the basement of Queen Street. So there was a total separation. But the fundamental thing was we felt it was really important that there was actually a defined city edge to the market, not just sort of, it needed to manage permeability in a true Melbourne sense, which is often about hard edges and then laneway spaces, and that there would be a kind of consistent philosophy of language of shopfront, of streetscape, which the market has a great history of, and particularly has a strong materiality of brick with these details, sometimes in bluestone, but more often in concrete and render effectively. And that led us very much to stop moving for a second, a streetscape that was about a series of, reasonably, I guess you'd say, robust brick and concrete facades that marched their way up the street to the point where the 6 Degrees building starts, which is the City Hall artwork, and then the corner as well. But it was really spoken about as a single element, which you can start to see in the articulation. It's been hard to get very low street photos because the council's actually redoing the whole streetscape at the moment, so all the landscaping's underway. But in reality, what we have is a hand-laid, pressed factory red brick sitting on a concrete lintel that's cast into the slab, and then a deep planter box bay window for the hotel. So we're responsible, I guess, for the hotel architecture, not the interior design, and the way it presents to the street with a series of kind of hung canopies, and really this idea that you were inhabiting the kind of interface between from the hotel perspective, inhabiting this edge of the market. So brick piers coming to ground, and then the strong contrast to the form. So what you're seeing in the foreground is the 6 Degrees building with the tower beyond, and glimpses, I guess, of that podium language. And you can see between the retained facade of the Market Cross in the corner and the language of the podium of the residential tower, a kind of consistent idea of those rendered horizontals with brick verticals. So as I mentioned, the tower really sits at this kind of confluence of the northern grid and the Hoddle grid. So we were interested, I guess, in the singularity of the form being important as defining a difference from the street edge. But fundamentally, it was also about breaking down a wide form. That's our planning envelope, which is a challenging kind of mass in a sense. It's very wide, a lot of south-facing units. So the idea of splitting it on axis with the podium break in the arcade, and also maximising our solar aspect, our views obviously, but also particularly the wind was really fundamental. We did a lot of work on ensuring that we weren't impacting that really important ability for the council to basically, use the market as they want it effectively. It was always a key driver. And achieving, I guess you'd say, so some of the kind of logic of the breakup of the podium led to the split in the tower, which helped us break down that kind of wide mass. It's led there to be 2 gardens on every level effectively, as the way we get air and light into the circulation of the floor plate. And then we had to work really quite hard to get to our 8-star NATERS rating. We ended up achieving 9 on the northern apartments, and effectively what that meant was that those north-facing and northwest-facing apartments don't need heating and cooling to maintain a comfortable temperature. They obviously have them because there's an expectation, but they don't need them. And we were very much interested in the idea of there being, it's a strong podium tower. The conversation with Rob Adams was always on the basis that there should be a high level of distinction between the tower form and the podium form. The podiums are about street and about human scale, and the towers then take on a kind of singular language because they are seen in the context of the city, which you can get from those kind of key perspectives. Really quickly, ground plane, you can see the lobby on the right-hand side, the arcade that runs through. It's a build-to-rent environment, which means it's almost sort of hotel-like, and the whole thing is about building community. So we have an internal environment that's very much about, I guess it's a textural response, quite youth-focused in terms of its aesthetic as well. But strong concierge and reception, and things like the mailroom being a feature where we're driving people's interactions with each other. And so you can see that that's the brick laneway leading in from Theory Street, and we'll look at that, the kind of articulation of the lobby.
Wrap up, yeah.